Walking the line between absolutely adorable and completely terrifying, the Frostclaw Paladins have charged into battle, and they'll be the figures we are painting today. The Frostclaws, about as sturdy as they come, are a fun addition to a Heroscape army, as they often catch your opponent off guard with their surprising speed and ferocity. These figures have a relatively simplistic design, and compared to units like Fiabani, use relatively few base colors. For your reference, here are the paints and brushes that I'll be using in this video, sticking to the Army Painter line, but as always, you are free to choose and match whichever brand you like best. And I, for one, can't bear to see these units unpainted. So let's rush in and get some paint on the Frostclaw Paladins, the frigid defenders of the North. Now, the real challenge of painting Frostclaws is their white fur, as white is often regarded as one of the more difficult colors to paint. There are many different ways to paint white, and today we'll be going over one method I use to paint the fur, but be on the lookout for some other methods as well. Before we begin painting, let's go on a little scientific detour into what polar bear fur actually looks like and how it behaves. I noticed a lot of deviation amongst the polar bear fur, with tan, gray, or even green undertones. You may say that all polar bear fur is white, but actually polar bear hair is translucent, designed to reflect white light. But various factors like food, environment, and age will alter those aforementioned subtones. Actually, in nature, true white isn't a possibility. Rather, what happens is your brain tricks your eyes to substitute the more brightly contrasted colors into what we call white. And while painting these bears, we're going to fully lean into this illusion and really focus on the undertones and the optical contrast. Thanks for sticking with the scientific lesson, but I feel like having this information will really kind of help you as you progress with the Frostclaws. So if you notice I primed the figure black, I personally recommend doing this. It does take a bit longer to add more layers, but it adds a nice, deeper and richer tone to the overall figure. Especially the parts with the metallics, claws, and like the nose, they're already painted. But if you want to spend less time layering the fur, then I definitely recommend priming in the gray. We're going to be putting several layers over this, so it doesn't ultimately matter. It just really depends on where you want to spend your time painting. Speaking of layers, that's going to be the name of the game for these first steps while painting the fur. I used a mixture of Tomb King Tan and Tundra Taupe for a strong, warm tone. I applied the paint over all the furred areas, paying special attention to the chin, underarms, and feet. When applying lighter colors, you'll want to thin your paints. Paint into the bottle is often dense, and the general thickness of the paint will obscure the many details on your model. Especially if you use straight white paint, it will look clumpy and chalky when it dries. Now that the base coat is finished, let's start building up the brightness of the fur. We're going to take that tan we used before and mix it with skeleton bone, and thinly apply it to the fur. You'll want to apply the thinned down and brighter color to the more prominent parts of the figure, focusing on the ears, snout, outer arms, and fingers. You want to apply about 2 coats of this lighter color. This is an optional step, but it does help kind of blend the base color with a bit more midtones. Since this is a squad and they all share similar color schemes, you'll want to work in assembly line fashion, essentially just adding one layer to each model, then moving on to the next, which will give time for the paint to dry and really greatly reduce the overall time it takes to paint these models. Now, if you haven't primed your model black, I definitely recommend painting all of the metallic parts black next and waiting for that to dry. Once the black paint, or if you would like me to use the black primer, is ready, essentially take some dark metallic, I'm using gunmetal, and apply it very firmly over all the metallic surfaces. The black undertone will really make the metal feel more vibrant and fill in the shadows and areas you missed with a much more natural looking colorization. For metallics, I do recommend painting the paint onto a separate palette if you are using a wet palette, as it does sometimes have a tendency to flow into your other paints and make a bit of a mess. And for the models with an open mouth, such as the one I'm working with here, you want to add a bit of red to help it stand out from the overwhelming kind of strong tones of the model. Now, actual polar bears do have a bit more of a black-red mouth, and you can choose to do that. I chose to make it a bit brighter, ignoring scientific accuracy for a bit more visual recognition. These are your models, and they're space bears, so you can make them whatever colors you want. I'm using a color called Mold Berry, which has some purpley tones to it, as pure red will make this polar bear look like it just feasted on a seal. Make sure you get the roof of the mouth and the gum line as well, and be sure to fix any mistakes where the red went onto the fur. We're going to work on the blue bits next, focusing on the coils and gloves. You want to use a dark, rich blue. I'm using Imperial Navy. This part you really want to focus on. Be careful not to have the blue go onto the previously painted parts of the body, as layering light tan over dark blue does take a good amount of time, and we all don't got all the time in the world to fix our mistakes. If you do make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can fix it. I mean, I layered straight up from black to get to this point, so it's possible. But if you don't want to apply 5 or 6 layers to nicely cover it, then just take your time. I made the mistake of over thinning my blue paint for one of my other models, and it got into the fur and to the small crevices, and it was kind of hard to fully clean up. Try to avoid the lines in the coils if possible, treating each segment of the coil as individual parts, but if you do get some color into it, no worries. I will be darkening those later. Mouth dry, start putting the initial layer on the teeth. Since we're using a warmer tone for the white fur, let's contrast this with a cooler gray and layer up from there. Make sure you use a brush with a good tip to accurately fill in the teeth, and try to avoid the spaces between if you primed your figure in black, as it'll save you some time later. For the pants, real fast, I just used a dark blue-green, specifically abyssal blue mixed with a bit of gray to desaturate it. This helps to visually separate it from the other, more brighter blue bits on the body. These are noble knights, befitting of shining armor, so let's brighten it up so. Take some plate mill silver and focus on the areas where the light will hit. Typically I like to focus on the bottom edge of the metal pieces and work my way up, but if you're looking for an easier method, you could dry brush the metal and it'll give a nice kind of textured, battle-worn look. As always, the wash is the key to a classic scape look. We're going to apply a dark wash to all the blue and metallic parts of the model. Avoid the area where the fur is, as the dark wash will make this fur look grayish. Notice how I'm using short strokes to guide the wash and maintain control of the shade. As always, watch out for unseemly pulling, and for a cleaner look, try to focus on the recessed areas. However, I typically like to put the Armory Painter shader over the whole metal, and then go back through and layer up. Next up, we're going to dry brush. Once the wash is completely dry, and I'm serious about this, you want it to be completely dry, Otherwise, there's a potential mess for your brushes and or the model. You're going to want to grab a very small dry brush to apply to the fur of the figure. You'll want to use a ivory color. I'm using ivory from Pro Acryl just because I had that on hand, but a good alternative if you're sticking to Army Painter is the Ancient Stone, as that will work just as well. And lightly apply that to the raised fur of the model. This is the part where we start bringing a bit of brightness into the layering we have done so far, and it really is going to start looking like a polar bear in this step. Using a small brush, it does make it easy to maneuver kind of around the pre-painted parts of this body. I recommend doing it in this order, as I've actually tried it several different ways, and it's nice to be able to kind of have a model finished in this sequence. But if you're not fully confident in this, you can just focus on the white, dry brush it, and then do the other layers, being a bit more careful on that. When dry brushing, you want to make sure that there is no liquid in the paint and the brush is mostly dry. However, I found that using a dampening pad, literally just a sponge in a cup with a bit of water, and adding a small amount of moisture to a brush will reduce the chalky texture that sometimes happens with this technique. Once the paint is on the brush, remove the excess onto a paper towel or a texture palette to the point where almost nothing remains in the brush. I always test my hand first to make sure there's no hidden globs or more than I realize, and then I apply it to the model, going against the flow of the texture. You can always kind of build up dry brush layers, focusing more on the prominent parts I mentioned before. Again, the hands, the snout, and ears being the most important visually, where the eye will pay attention to. If you want to make the fur even brighter, you can use a detail brush and pick out some of the strands of fur, tracing the raised hair with a light beige. Don't overdo it, just a few hairs through the raised and uppermost part of the arms, face, and fingers will help these Frostclaws stand out. At this point, notice how we never even used true white, still ending the fur a couple shades away from that total whiteness, but it still has a very bright, natural looking appearance. It certainly appears a lot less flat, and this is the beauty of painting your own models. You're able to add a bit of nuance and texture to a model that sometimes doesn't show up on a pre-painted variety. Next, we're going to use mithril silver, a really bright silver, and focus on some of the raised bumps of the armor to again add a bit of contrast. I edge highlighted some of the topmost armor plates and made a bunch of small strokes to give the armor a bit of texture. If you want your armor to appear deeper and a bit more impactful, or if you cover the lines too much separating the various armor segments, you can take some lightly thinned down paint and fill in the recess of the plate mail with a simple black line. This process is called blacklining, and it really makes a lot of your models pop. It takes a bit of skill, but it's definitely a technique that works really great for these models, as the wash is great and kind of adds a bit of depth to it, but these add a strong sense of contrast. You want to make sure you also fill in the eyes and nose of those kind of covered up. For the eyes, just kind of want to just use very carefully, kind of draw the outline and work your way in. And same for the nose, don't go over. Pretty much you want to make the top part a triangle and then kind of add a bit of a half circle indentation on each side. If you're struggling to make kind of the specific shape, you can just point a full-on triangle for the nose area. You do want to make sure the paint is only slightly thinned down, as you don't want it to flow into the white, but you want to try to draw a thin black line where the mouth meets the teeth. which creates a nice point of separation from the mouth and furred body. For maximum effect, try to paint a little black line between each tooth as well. This is fine detail work and it does come with a bit of practice, so just make sure your posture is good and your arms are firmly balanced in your table. The more close to the bristle that you hold your brush, the more control you have but the less movement you retain. After the black lines have been applied, very carefully apply some moderately thinned down layers of white to the model's teeth. Apply a couple of layers until the teeth are nice and bright, and you really want to focus on the outermost parts for the teeth. And while you're working with this white, try to add a small singular dot to the center of the eyes. And lastly, you can use a tiny bit of that pure white to add a bit of texture to the face, where you can draw some small straight lines around the muzzle to make it look like it has a bit of a furry mouth. Lastly, I use a bit of thinned down tidal blue on the various blue parts of the model, trying to follow the curvature of the coil specifically. Be careful to avoid the recesses as you want those to be deep and dark. You can mix a bit of crystal blue with the abyssal blue and edge highlight the straps and gloves for a bit brighter of a highlight and a lot more of an eye-catching experience with the colors. And then we're about all said and done. Paint the base the style of your choosing, perhaps even adding some cool snow effects to it, and be sure to apply a couple of layers of satin varnish for maximum effect. The Frostclaw is a great unit to hone your painting skills, because if I know anything about the future, there's going to be a lot more bears, bears, and bears. So it's best to fully be prepared. And it's me again, Heroscaper, the guy who likes to paint miniatures that already come pre-painted. If this video helped you out, be sure to leave a like, and if you have any questions about the process or have a suggestion for what you would like me to cover next, be sure to let me know in the comments. And as always, huge thanks to Renegade for sending the figures early so I can get them all painted for you. If you want to get these chilly boys for yourself, check out my affiliate link, as it costs you nothing extra and helps support the channel. And once again, finding myself with no way to end this video, I leave you with a polar bear related conundrum. Which gray is lighter? As you ponder that, you all take care.